Those databases can be incredibly valuable for national security. In what way exactly? Your genome and mine differ by just 0.01%. That's why you look the way I do, and I look the way I do. Has funding for scientific research become more fair now? Of course, there's still work to be done. The formation of this gene pool also coincides with the 13th, 14th centuries, the era of the Golden Horde. What keeps drawing you back to the research? At just 36, Maxat Zhabagin is already a PhD, the recipient of multiple scientific awards and the head of the Human Genetics Laboratory at the National Center for Biotechnology. His work focuses on genetic genealogy and the history of gene pool formation among Central Asian peoples, as well as forensic and medical human genetics. Alongside his research, he is actively involved in public initiatives supporting young scientists like himself. Maxat, good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. You're well known in Kazakhstan for your outspoken support of science and young scientists. But today we've come to the National Center for Biotechnology to see firsthand what you actually do in the lab, what this science we're all talking about really looks like in practice. Of course, welcome. I'm glad to have you here at the National Center for Biotechnology. I head the Human Genetics Lab, and I'll be happy to walk you through what we do, how our research actually works in practice, and talk about some of the bigger issues we're tackling in the field.
И обсудить насущные вопросы нашей науки. В настоящий момент у нас три.
Our lab focuses on three key areas: population genetics, forensic genetics, and medical genetics. In the area of population genetics, our main goal is to explore how the gene pool of Central Asian peoples has developed over time. My interest in this field goes back to my student days at Moscow State University, named after M.V. Lomonosov, where I studied genetics in the Faculty of Biology. During a summer field trip to a biological research station, I had the chance to attend a captivating lecture by Ilya Artemyevich Zakharov-Gezihus, a corresponding member of the Russian Academy of Sciences, who later became my academic mentor. He spoke about his research expeditions tracing the genetic legacy of Genghis Khan. After the lecture, we got into a deep conversation. I told him about some of the unique traditions we've preserved, like our genealogical trees, and specifically about the Tore clan, who trace their ancestry directly back to Genghis Khan, according to oral histories and written records. That conversation was the start of an exciting collaboration. He later connected me with professors Oleg and Yelena Balanovsky, who run one of Russia's top labs in genetic geography. I ended up completing my dissertation under their supervision, and it was at a conference while presenting my research that I met the director of the National Center for Biotechnology, who invited me to come back to Kazakhstan and establish a lab dedicated to this very work. So when you first started building your biobank, you were working with just 1,000 samples. Now, as you mentioned, you've collected over 5,000. What keeps drawing you back to this research? How long can a project like this go on? And more importantly, what's the ultimate goal?
Здесь действительно есть два аспекта. Один фундаментальный, больше.
There are really two sides to this. One is fundamental, and that's the part that fascinates me the most as a researcher. It's about the origins of the peoples of Central Asia, especially the Kazakhs. How did our gene pool come together? What kinds of connections do we share with neighboring peoples? Many of the same clans and tribal structures found among Kazakhs also appear among the Bashkirs, Kyrgyz, and even some Uzbek communities. It's almost like piecing together an ancestral puzzle.
Каждого рода, у каждого...
And each clan, each tribe often has its own ethnographic or genealogical version of how it came to be.
И очень интересно, как бы...
What's fascinating is comparing those narratives to hard genetic data and seeing where they align.
Второй аспект это, да,
The second aspect is more practical.
плоскость лежит в...
It ties into forensic genetics, which we're also developing here in the lab.
Развиваем.
All of this genetic material goes into building databases, and those databases can be incredibly valuable for national security.
Быть полезны для национальной безопасности.
In what way exactly?
Например, на месте происшествия, какого-нибудь преступления.
Well, say a crime has been committed. The perpetrator almost always leaves behind some biological evidence.
Изучив ДНК и сравнив,
If we can extract DNA from that and compare it to what's in our database, we might be able to identify where that person comes from.
эти исследования, там, то
And if you go further, epigenetic analysis can give you a rough idea of their age.
определить примерно возраст.
Combine that with phenotypic data and you can start reconstructing what person might look like.
Реконструкцию внешнего облика.
So you could build essentially a composite image.
Да, можно. Но еще один пример яркий, будучи
Yes, that's exactly it.
научным руководителем Олега
I'll give you a powerful example.
в Домодедово.
When I was still a student working with my advisor, Oleg Balanovsky, there was a terrorist attack at Domodedovo airport.
Данных.
The authorities had a DNA sample from the suspect, which they ran through databases of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, but they also asked my advisor to check it against his scientific databases.
Совпадение с определенным там регионом Кавказа.
He had conducted wide-ranging expeditions across Russia, and he was able to identify genetic markers that pointed to a particular region of the Caucasus.
ФСБ.
The Federal Security Service already had groups under surveillance in that area.
Могут потенциально быть опасны.
Thanks to this lead, they were able to act fast. They identified the individuals involved, uncovered their plans, and managed to prevent several more attacks.
Еще несколько как бы терактов.
А если говорить о ваших экспедициях,
Now, when it comes to your own expeditions, you mentioned gathering genetic material in southern Kazakhstan.
материал,
I'm curious, what was that like in practice?
как реагировали люди, когда вы
How did people react when you, a young scientist, showed up asking for their DNA?
что-нибудь их биоматериал?
Значит, биологический материал мы раньше собирали венозную кровь, сейчас больше практикуем слюну. С венозной кровью, конечно, так как это все-таки забор из...
At the time, we were mostly collecting blood samples, which meant drawing blood from a vein.
Но так как
Naturally, that made some people a little wary.
с нами вместе в экспедицию уезжает и история,
These days, we mostly collect saliva. It's much less invasive.
задача нашего исследования.
But even back then, once we explained what we were doing, people were usually open.
Свой вклад в...
Our expeditions included historians and ethnographers, so we took the time to really talk with people, explained our goals, how their participation contributes to understanding the origins of their own clan, and how the data might one day even help in medical genetics research.
Так как это все превращается как бы в референс.
Most people in those communities have a deep knowledge of their family history. They know their ancestry back 7 generations.
Прекрасно знают свое щежере, 7 колен.
Maxat, now this is where it gets really interesting. Once biological sample makes it to the lab, what happens next? What do the scientists actually do with it?
В первую очередь выделяем ДНК.
Well, the first thing we do is extract the DNA from the cells. After that, it all depends on what we're trying to study. Sometimes we sequence the DNA, basically we decode the order of the nucleotides. This analyzer, for instance, can read up to 900 base pairs at a time.
900 символов.
Is that enough?
Но это,
That really depends on the goal.
если вас...
If the section you're looking at falls within that 900, sure, it's enough.
Но
But most modern research these days requires decoding as much of the genome as possible.
максимально полного генома.
And actually here in Kazakhstan, we've got the tech to sequence the full human genome, all 3 billion base pairs.
3 миллиарда.
So if the machine is doing all the decoding, what does the scientist actually do? Is your job to compare, to analyze? What comes after?
Анализом, что происходит
Да,
дальше?
машина-то ведь только дает нам
Exactly. The machine gives us just the sequence, like a text.
вашим геномом и моим геномом.
For example, your genome and mine differ by just 0.01%.
В основном
The rest is identical.
одинаковое.
So we try to figure out where those differences are.
Понять, сопоставить.
So it's that tiny fraction that makes the difference.
И на что оно вот влияет.
That's right. And we try to figure out what they mean, how they interact, and ultimately why you look
Вот как
the way I do, and I look the way I do. But how do you even study something like that? There must be algorithms, models. Surely this isn't something you're doing by hand.
в зависимости тоже.
Definitely not. Again, it depends on the scope. If we're analyzing entire genomes, we need powerful servers and high-performance computing systems. But if we're just looking at small segments, like short tandem repeats, a strong laptop will do. We use a whole range of software tools for bioinformatics, phylogenetic analysis, statistics. It all depends on the research question.
Все зависит от поставленных задач.
And what about your lab's tech? How well equipped are geneticists in Kazakhstan when it comes to staying up to date?
Который отвечает современным требованиям.
В основном
For the most part, we're not far behind the leading labs globally.
от
The difference is in quantity.
мира.
Where top-tier labs might have 10 units of something, we might only have 1 for the entire center.
Это единица одна на весь центр.
But at least you have access to it.
Проблема, наверное,
We do. The bigger challenge is reagents.
реагенты.
First, they're cheaper abroad since they're produced there.
И во-вторых, доставка
And second, they arrive much faster.
ведущих научных лабораторий.
In the top labs, if a researcher comes up with an idea in the evening, they can order the reagents that night and get them within a couple of days, or even by the next morning.
У вас уже в лаборатории.
And how does that compare to Kazakhstan?
Обычно в договорах прописано.
Well, here the contracts usually set a delivery window of 60 to 90 days. That's a big disadvantage.
Потому что идея может прийти.
Say I come up with a hypothesis at the same time as a colleague in the US. They can test it the very next day.
Но он сможет ее проверить и
I might have to wait 3 months just to get the materials.
месяца.
You're also a member of the National Kurultai, an advisor to the President of the Academy of Sciences of Kazakhstan, and a member of the Senate's Expert Council. Did I forget anything?
Являетесь членом Совета экспертов при Сенате. И, наверное, что-то я еще забыла.
I'm also the chair of the Council of Young Scientists. Right, of course, at the National Academy of Sciences. How do you manage to juggle all these roles alongside your scientific research? Do you manage to keep up with everything? And most importantly, why is it so important for you to be involved in such public activities, especially when you're also focusing on your serious research?
Упомянул только одну из проблем, с которой сталкиваются ученые в Казахстане. И, естественно,
Well, first of all, when we were in the lab, I mentioned just one of the challenges scientists face here in Kazakhstan.
поднимать эти вопросы и
And naturally, I am no stranger to those struggles myself.
путем
That's why at a certain point in my career, I felt compelled to raise these issues, and I'm still doing it today.
нагрузка. Бывает, что приходится
Over time, I've gotten involved in various groups, which has obviously added significantly to my workload.
свои научные исследования.
Sometimes it means working late into the night to meet deadlines for both my scientific research and public service commitments.
Участвуя в этих всех процессах,
On the flip side, though, being involved in these processes allows you to see things from a different perspective, gain valuable experience, and hopefully help solve some of the problems so that the next generation of scientists won't have to face the same challenges.
молодых будет меньше сталкиваться с этими проблемами.
И вот самое
So, are you actually seeing the results of your public work?
общественной деятельности.
Yes, we can say we are. It's not immediate, but we're seeing gradual progress. Many of the initiatives we've discussed in the Young Scientists Council since 2019 are now being implemented bit by bit. Could you give us an example?
Например, в те же года, например,
Well, for instance, you might have heard about the big scandal over grant funding back in 2018.
и
At that time, our colleagues Durvudkhan Suragan, now the youngest academician, and Ayimgul Kerimrai, an international expert in ecology, brought the issue of unfair project funding to the president's attention.
несправедливым финансированием.
Around the same time, my colleagues, including Asiya Yermuhametova, established the Young Researcher Alliance.
Асия Ермухаметова,
It became the voice of our generation of young scientists.
Young Researcher Alliance, появились.
Thanks to the initiative of the former minister Askat Aymagambetov, the Council of Young Scientists was formed.
На тот момент министра
We immediately started looking at how to improve the process for PhD defenses, doctoral studies, and publishing opportunities.
защитам PhD докторантуры.
We also introduced extensions for defense deadlines at no extra cost.
Также бесплатное продление.
Most importantly, we created specific funding competitions for young scientists, so the best of them could get their first experience managing projects.
На финансирование, чтобы лучше
The Jaz Ghalam Young Scientist program was also launched to help those who had left science to return.
и привлечь проекты.
Whether they were about to defend their dissertation or had already completed it, but had drifted away from the field, this program allowed them to return to science by working on small projects.
Небольшие проекты возвращаются в науку.
Has funding for scientific research become fairer now?
Да, на тот момент не
Yes. Back then, there weren't clear and fair criteria for evaluating and funding projects, and a lot of decisions were made behind closed doors.
моменты решались. Наши предложения.
But our suggestions were supported, and the work of national scientific councils has become more organized. The state's scientific and technical review process has also been better structured.
В некоторых
Of course, there's still work to be done.
тоже есть над чем работать.
Maxat, what have your research findings been? What important conclusions have you reached over the course of nearly 10 years?
Но изучая нематериальное культурное наследие казахов в Чежире, с точки зрения генетики мы доказываем, что, по крайней мере, большая ее часть действительно соответствует генетической генеалогии. То есть
In studying the material and cultural heritage of the Kazakhs, specifically their genealogical tree from a genetic standpoint, we've been able to demonstrate that at least for the majority of it, it matches up with genetic genealogy.
результат. И
This means that in most cases, the members of a clan can trace their ancestry back to a common biological lineage.
можно сказать, основатели отцов этих многих родов
It's a really fascinating result.
1000 лет, и в основном
Another important point is that the age of the most recent common ancestors, the founding fathers of these clans, dates back to just a few thousand years ago, and this aligns mainly with the period of the Golden Horde.
хромосоме. Это часто
However, it's important to avoid oversimplifying genetic genealogy by focusing solely on the Y chromosome.
группы выдвигаются тезисы о
There's often a lot of misinterpretation online where people discuss haplogroups and make claims about dividing clans.
из родов, и по отцовской генетической линии
But we know that Kazakh society consists of clans, and while there are indeed different genetic lines on the paternal side, different founding fathers, when we look at their complete genomes, we see no significant differences between the clans or between different geographical regions or subpopulations of Kazakhs.
все едины.
They're all part of the same genetic group.
Примерно
Interestingly, the formation of this gene pool also coincides with the 13th, 14th centuries, the era of the Golden Horde, and the beginning of the Kazakh Khanate.
начало казахского ханства, то есть
So, in a sense, the people who lived back then and those alive today are genetically quite similar.
не отличаются друг от друга.
there's a clear continuity.
Прямую преемственность.
Максат, ну у вас очень необычная карьера. Я имею в виду то, что после школы вы поступили все-таки на экономический.
Maxat, you've had a rather unconventional career path.
Проучившись всего года.
After high school, you initially enrolled in the economics program at Qazaqstan State University, but after just a year, you decided to apply for the Bolashak scholarship and completely switched directions, diving into the natural sciences.
Продолжать учиться именно на биофаке.
What led you to make such a dramatic change and pursue biology instead?
И
I graduated from the Daran School for Gifted Children in Karaganda, which was a strong multidisciplinary school.
предметом достаточно, я думаю, хорошие знания нам.
I feel we received solid knowledge across all subjects.
История.
In school, I was interested in history, scientific projects, and participating in Olympiads, especially in history.
Я решил поступить на эконом.
After graduation, I decided to enroll in the economics department at Karaganda State University, since it was the top university in my hometown.
На экономфаке я начал понимать, что
But as I continued my studies, I realized that while economics is undeniably useful, it wasn't quite where my heart was.
все же здесь тоже такая
It's an interesting shift, actually, because, as I mentioned, I had always been passionate about history.
история. Уже будучи распределившись на кафедры,
When I eventually got assigned to various departments, I found myself coming back to my original interest through genetics and studying the genetic history of peoples.
истории формирования народов.
А вот вспоминая ваш опыт,
Looking back at your own recent experience, when you had just finished school and were deciding which path to take in life, what do you think about how the pool of young scientists is being filled today?
вот этот пул тех самых молодых ученых,
What kind of people are entering science now, particularly among the younger generation?
имею в виду из числа молодых,
Who is choosing a research career today?
вот такую исследовательскую?
Но в первую очередь, наверное, в науку идут молодые люди, в которых и есть вот интерес к познанию, какое-то любопытство свое личное к какому-то вопросу. Ну, как мы с вами ранее обсуждали, последние 5 лет достаточно большое внимание.
I think first and foremost, young people who choose science are those driven by a genuine curiosity and a real passion for understanding the world.
В реальном плане тоже есть подъем.
As we've discussed over the last 5 years, the government and the president have put a lot of emphasis on science, especially on supporting young scientists.
И престиж
There's been a noticeable boost in financial support, including specific grants, just for them.
наверное, те ребята, которые
Since the last year, the president himself has started handing out housing certificates to young scientists, which has really elevated the prestige of the field.
все в своих направлениях достаточно успешные.
And I think this has encouraged those who once had doubts or left science to come back.
Роль
Many of my peers, young scientists, are already doing really well in their fields, and they're taking on a role in spreading the word about science.
у них будет ломаться стереотип, то что ученые это
In fact, some of them might even become role models for younger generations.
седоволосые с бородой.
We're starting to break the stereotype that scientists are all old, wise men with long beards. Now we're seeing young, successful women and men doing great work.
которые делают науку не только в Казахстане, наши соотечественники за рубежом очень
Not just here in Kazakhstan, but also abroad, where many of our fellow citizens are excelling.
задач использовать потенциал наших.
And one of our goals right now is to harness the potential of these young scientists working outside of Kazakhstan.
Все готовы приехать в Казахстан, но для них
Not everyone is ready to return, but we should have programs and possibly even funding options that allow them to contribute to projects for Kazakhstan while still working abroad with access to the latest ideas and cutting-edge labs.
выполняют какие-то задачи, которые полезны здесь для нас.